Welcome to another episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Our co-hosts, Sri Rajagopalan and Peter V.S. Bond, explore how brands and retailers engage with consumers online, in-store, and everywhere in between. And now, here are Sri and Peter. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CPG Guys podcast. I'm PVSB, one of the aforementioned CPG guys. I'm also the Vice President of Partner Strategy and Development at Fetch Rewards mobile loyalty platform. As always, I'm joined on this educational journey about how brands and retailers engage consumers by my very dear friend and a thought leader in the consumer packaged goods world. He's always curious, which I think makes him an ideal podcast co-host. Please join me in welcoming the other CPG guy, Sri. Sri, hey, how you doing today?
Hello, Mr. Bond. How's it going? What a pleasure to do this week over week with you and another exciting guest. More exciting topics. What can get better than that?
I don't think anything, Sri. It's pretty awesome. Really excited about it. And I'm glad to have you on this journey with me. Before we get to our guest, I want to remind our audience that all of our content, we have over 125 episodes now. We're on 40 plus podcasting platforms. You can go get it. Just visit cpgguys.com. And the best part about it, it's all free. We don't charge for it. You can download that. We have some documents on our site. You can find links to our other platforms, Instagram, TikTok. Sri, we really need to get to our TikTok content creation. We haven't been doing that. But it's all free there. And we also recommend, if you haven't done so already, go to LinkedIn, search for CPG Guys. And when you get to our page, just click the follow button in the upper left. It's the best way to see all the content we're publishing. Again, that's all free too. So we're very happy. We just crossed 7,000 organically sourced followers. We also have over 100,000 downloads. Sri, can you believe we're there? Crazy, isn't it? Increasingly in the age of digital engagement, brands are seeking to establish meaningful and measurable one-to-one relationships with their consumers. The pandemic served only to accelerate the need for engagement platforms with analytic capabilities. While retail media offerings are widely available, the consumer relationship is ultimately owned by the retailer, which does not often enable brands to activate outside of these closed-loop platforms. So here to speak to us about the transformation happening in the community of CPG manufacturers around effective consumer engagement is the Senior Director of Consumer Relationships at Kimberly-Clark, a global manufacturer of personal care and household products with iconic brands I'm sure you're all familiar with: Kleenex, Huggies, Cottonelle. Please join Sri and me in welcoming Josh Blacksmith. Hey, Josh, how you doing today?
Hey, Peter. Hey, Sri. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Really amazing what you guys have built with this podcast. So really honored to be on with you today.
Oh, it's our honor completely, Josh. We just love having great guests. And you and I have known each other for a couple months since I joined Fetch and became much familiar with your relationship with us. So it's been great for us. We're just so happy to have you with us today. And before we get to the questions, would you give our audience a little bit about first where they can learn more about your company on the web? And then would you give us just an overview of kind of what your responsibilities are at Kimberly-Clark?
Yeah, you bet. Anybody who's listening can go to Kimberly-Clark.com to find information about any of our brands. You can also find a lot around sort of our organizational values, corporate strategies like our 2030 sustainability goals. I think, I'd be remiss not to mention that some of our ambition to sort of ease our carbon footprint by 2030. But a lot that we're really excited about can be found there. You can ultimately sort of get a sense about how KC is, how we operate, and what we're doing to really lead the world in essentials for a better life. But my team and I, we work as part of what's called the Digital Marketing Center of Excellence. It's a group of only about 25 people, so a fairly small team, but it is central, so it works across all of our brands, all of our sectors across the globe. So I can tell you there's never a dull moment. It's a role that requires a significant amount of influence, trying to help the organization understand what we do or where we should be going and why it's important for us to sort of make some of the pivots we are. So I primarily wear two hats within the COE. First, I and my team, we work to develop and embed a lot of consumer-centric digital capability. So thinking about how we leverage zero, first, second, third-party data. So what are we doing to acquire data and also drive engagement strategies across things like social, .com, email, SMS. This gets into areas like privacy by design, digital products, things like that. The other hat I wear is really in helping lead our overall digital transformation agenda. And this is an area that I'm super passionate about, where we're really helping define new ways of working for the organization, and then leveraging an agile process to truly sort of build and embed that capability globally.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for that, Josh. We're going to include in the digital liner notes of this podcast episode links to Kimberly-Clark online and your LinkedIn profile so people can learn more about you, because they love to multitask while they're listening. So if that's okay, I'm just going to get right into it. I've got all open with the first question. Sri will come after me. Let's get a little broad. I want to look at this probably from an industry perspective. From your perspective, what are some of the emerging consumer relationship capabilities that have your interest, and how are data, creative, and technology really enabling those capabilities?
Yeah, you bet. First, let me just say, it's a super exciting time to be in digital marketing in our industry, as I'm sure you guys can both attest, right? I think for the first time ever, data, technology, and creativity are truly coming together in a way that allows us to do things that even 5 years ago, were just a dream. I feel really lucky to be in this industry at a moment in time where we can actually harness the power of these three to unlock experiences for our consumers. The other thing that I think I'll call out, like in terms of where I'm focused on building different consumer relationship capabilities, I think the deprecation of third-party cookies is such a good thing for all of us. I think it's also, there's a bit of a collective sigh of relief that we just punted that out a couple of years. But at the same time, I'm so happy that this is coming, because it just forces us as marketers to be so much more thoughtful around who we're talking to, where we're talking to them, and truly focused on what's most important, which is, unlocking value for consumers that extends beyond just our functional product attributes. I truly believe that it's really going to push us in a really meaningful way that's going to drive greater relevance at the end of the day. So there are really two key areas I'm focused, and this is really one of the core focuses of that space, the digital transformation space that I'm driving inside KC. The first is this space of cross-channel orchestration, and I think it's interesting. This is on the surface, probably a lot of head nods. Yep, everybody's thinking about cross-channel orchestration. I'll say that I'm really in awe of the concept of channelless marketing. I'm not sure of the near-term practicality of that, and I think we always like to put the consumer first and think about how are we connecting consumers' needs into our business growth objectives and sort of building from there. But the idea of always being on where consumers expect us to be and doing it in a seamless way is, again, just really a core focus. So that starts for us by building an integrated planning process. This means that our brand managers internally need to take more on versus depending on external partners to sort of help build, sort of cross-channel plans, but actually enabling and empowering our brand managers to be able to make the call in terms of how external partners are involved in what way to drive against our growth objectives. I absolutely see that future empowered through technology like CDPs. CDPs are very buzzwordy, and they, you ask 50 people what a CDP is and does, and you get 50 answers. I would say for us, it's not so much about the data connectivity. We have our data environments, both the known and the unknown. For us, it's really about creating a UI, a tool that can actually enable our brand managers to establish business rules and define the consumer journey, who should be getting an email day one, and then taking that exact same record and onboarding that and sending them into an audience to receive a message on Facebook day 7. We may not know if that consumer actually engaged in Facebook, but we at least know that on day 10, we can send that exact same consumer an impression through a programmatic exchange on a publisher site. And we then are sort of in the driver's seat in defining what is the ideal journey that we're going to send a consumer down that drives the best business outcome for us. And so I view the CDP sort of playing a really critical role in the future of helping us bridge the known and unknown and truly helping us orchestrate experiences in a more seamless way and doing it with a lot more efficiency. If we can actually put our brand managers into the driver's seat when it comes to sort of activating in that way, that's massive. It also gets into real-time interaction management. How are we leveraging real consumer behavior to drive next best messaging? So anyhow, a lot sort of wrapped up in that space. And the other one I'll call out is this idea of creative personalization capability. I think this holds true whether we're talking about DCO or email or .com. I always try to toe the line between embracing personalization and trying to not to scare our teams internally because they sort of immediately will jump down the path of hyper personalization and all the inefficiencies that come with that. So when I think about the role that automation through tools like Flash Talking or AdLib for DCO as an example, what those can help unlock for us, using data and data signals to help drive the way that we engage, it allows us to think about things like, Peter, if you were to tweet a birth announcement today and I tweeted a birth announcement tomorrow, we can use the exact same creative, but we recognize the fact that our journeys are unique. And while that creative can work in both cases, your journey started one day before mine. And so leveraging the power of this technology and these tools to enable personalization through the lens of meaningfulness and relevance. And so that's the other sort of huge area I'd say that we're focused on, sort of how we can unlock that as a capability for the organization.
Thank you for that, Josh. Welcome to this episode of the CPG Guys. So you said a lot of capabilities in there, right? But budgets are not infinite, and the game of managing this well and actually delivering outcomes for any organization is prioritization, optimization, things of that nature, right? Where do you see brands making those prioritization choices, and where does the actual resourcing for this come from? Which areas do you prioritize, and how do you personally think about those, Josh?
Yeah. Change management is a beast, and so when you're trying to introduce new capability, new ways of working, it's always easiest to default back to the known, default back to what's easiest, default back to what a mixed model tells you is working, and just sort of trust that almost, you can trust that off a cliff, sometimes to your own detriment sometimes because you don't actually interrogate some of those, historical ways of working closely enough. So one of the things that I found that we can do to help drive the kind of influence we need to is to really focus on establishing hypotheses and building finite, really defined test plans where we can, on the back end of that, demonstrate the value that this was able to unlock, even if it wasn't sort of against maybe a more traditional KPI like ROI. But if we have the ability to demonstrate the value that can unlock for the organization, and that gives us everything we need to start to build momentum and start to, it starts to become a very easy sell at some point once you get some wins in sort of a small scale fashion. But I think it's what in CPG, I'd say one of the things that we have to do first is help the organization, help any CPG organization recognize that mixed models have significant blind spots in most cases. I think mixed models in large part exist to help you optimize within one specific channel environment, paid media. How is our working spend going today, and how can we make it work better tomorrow? And I think what it does not do, those can become very self-serving to a certain extent, and I think at some point, we need to realize that there is this blind spot and that these models aren't actually telling us all the places we could or should be investing that could help improve our ROIs or could perhaps become a completely new way of driving business growth. And I think that's where we've done some work, and I think just more broadly have a lot more work to do to keep interrogating the way that we measure success against a lot of our marketing activity, and to sort of push ourselves into new spaces. Even things like, diagnostic CX scores. How can we use those alongside traditional ROIs to help perhaps uncover where we're driving growth through relevance and establishing value with consumers, right?
So, Josh, the pandemic had a profound impact on brand loyalty, particularly at the beginning as product availability was severely challenged, household paper being a clear example. So switching became a necessity to ensure consumers could satisfy their base needs. So from your experience and what you saw, what best-in-class examples come to mind on how brands effectively managed consumer relationships to minimize the negative impact on share of wallet during the last 1.5 years? And are there any categories that you look out there and still see are facing this challenge?
I mean, what an interesting year, right? In spite of all the sort of bad things last year delivered, somehow a toilet paper brand becomes, like panic buying and has like one of its best years ever. I think number one for us, when you think about like consumers going someplace else because we couldn't satisfy their needs, it came down to availability. Stockouts, not having our product there when a consumer wanted it is immediately going to force them into a competitive space, because there's just a need, even if it's an irrational need in some cases. But I think beyond that, we start to get into how are we building frictionless buying opportunities for our consumers, taking the pain out of purchase, whether it's first time purchase or repeat purchase, is everything. We as humans are programmed to sort of take the path of least resistance. And if we're creating too many barriers for our consumers to find our product or buy our product, they're not going to go a second click. They're going to go somewhere else because that becomes sort of a proposition that that's more appealing. So I think one of the big opportunities that's uncovered for us and probably a number of other CPGs is the concept of incidental loyalty. When you have massive amounts of site traffic, massive amounts of volume coming through with enough foresight, and I think there's a lot of hindsight now, but with enough foresight, you can start to actually capture some level of relationship building at that first interaction where we had consumers that were never buying our product before. It gave us a great opportunity to perhaps start to build a relationship versus just be a spot for the next transaction, which is in large part what it sort of becomes. And so that starts to get into the space of things like subscription buying, So even if you get a consumer into a subscription during panic buying, that doesn't mean that you can't still manage a relationship, letting them know about your availability, but at least you have the opportunity to bring them back into the brand, when the time is right, when the availability is there. And I will say that we see a lot of value even through our retail partners in this space today. They've got recommendation engines that in large part will talk about prior purchases that were made within their gardens. And it's a great opportunity for any of our products that were purchased during that sort of a panic buying frenzy to be surfaced the next time they're in that category making a purchase. In terms of your question about other categories, we see facing this challenge. It's interesting because I think there were a number of categories that were impacted by this. Whether you want to look at sort of hand sanitizer, for example, right? And I think everybody took very similar lessons away from that. I would not want to say that any of us are sort of in the clear. Particularly when you take a global view, right? And some of how this pandemic is impacting different countries in different ways, and it's sort of spinning up very similar behavioral patterns that we were seeing here, just in different markets around the globe.
Thank you for that. You referred to building a relationship with the consumer pretty consistently back in the answer to Peter's question. Obviously, a relationship with the consumer creates as well as is directly proportional to what first-party data that you actually have. And it's so important this first party consumption data in building that consumer relationships, right? How do you go about sourcing this kind of data, and how do you convert those to insights? And do you really partner a lot with the external community in sourcing that data? And once you do have it, how do you actually put it to work for you so it gives you the best ROI?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm sure you've experienced this as well, Shri. Right? Like in terms of the power, the value that it can unlock. It's tremendous. I think what's interesting for CPG outside of D2Cs, which are perhaps in some cases native, sort of digitally native D2Cs that were sort of born out of that D2C environment and perhaps bought at some point by a sort of a non-native D2C organization. The fact that we have consumption and transactional data available to us is relatively new. I think that we have, an amazing partnership, Peter, as you know, with Fetch that gives us the ability to have access to insight and understanding about basket level activity that just, historically was again, just not there, wasn't present. We've also, now been getting into conversations with second party transactional, data providers, the Quotients and Nielsen's of the world that give us the ability to sort of bring those data sets into our own environments and do some of the same sort of value unlock work that we can with our own first party data sets as well. I think to your point about sort of externals, we don't really see our retail partners too anxious, to share anything sort of first party. Now, obviously, they've stood up clean rooms that give us the opportunity to actually optimize within those gardens, but they're still very much focused on like even asking questions around, can we help build their first party asset, And so today we don't really see and depend on a retailer to drive first party for us at all. It just creates an environment where we can take our own first party understanding, perhaps, and I'm hungry for the day that this continues to mature, but then start to optimize our spend through the funnel within those sorts of environments. But I think by having access to this kind of first party data, transaction level consumption data, it gives us the ability to do things like build RFM models. Recency, frequency, monetary value, gives us the ability to do market basket analysis. Like if I can see that somebody is buying allergy medication, how do I get a Kleenex message to them? We should be in that moment, right? And so this is an amazing unlock for a lot of CPGs right now, and just starts to broaden the opportunities we have to drive a lot of lower funnel performance.
So, Josh, you mentioned retail media. Let's talk a little bit about that. It's obviously all the rage in the CPG industry. If you paid attention to any of the presentations that were made back in February at the annual Consumer Analysts Group of New York conference, they were just laden with references to both retail media, digital media, and shifting budgets in that direction. Brands are rapidly expanding or reallocating their budgets to receiving retail media platforms like Walmart Connect, Amazon Advertising, Kroger Precision Marketing, Instacart ads, and the like. My question to you is, are they all of these pretty much, are they all walled gardens? And if at all, do these closed loop platforms provide brands with opportunities to build direct consumer relationships? And are there specific capabilities within these retail media platforms that you are hoping are going to emerge that will provide brands with more value?
Yeah, first of all, as far as I would define them, they're all walled gardens, which is totally fine. Like, look, I get it. I think we all do. We understand sort of the value of an owned asset, like a first party record, and they have an opportunity to monetize that. If anybody... Ultimately, like if anybody should ultimately own that data, it might be a consumer, but that's a whole other sort of philosophical discussion, right? But yeah, absolutely. These in all of these environments, you can put anything you want into them, nothing comes out. Clean rooms, like I mentioned before, give you the ability to optimize your spend inside of these, but we've also found these are all very much in their infancy. Like a lot of these have been starting to be stood up in the last year. Some of them still haven't been stood up with some of our retail partners. So, but you asked about opportunities to build relationships. I think I'll connect that to your last question a little bit, because I think purchase is such a huge part of the journey, obviously, right? We would be, we wouldn't be true to ourselves and we wouldn't be honest in this conversation if we didn't say that a lot of what we do to build relationships with consumers is because there's a commercial benefit in the end. And so, we want to work with these gardens, with any of these retailers, to do the best we can to get our digital shelf in order. It's a top priority for us. We'd like eventually to be able to better understand individual purchase behavior inside those environments, so that we can take more of a full funnel sort of approach. And we see this happening in Asia, right? In China, we can see different providers that give you the ability to sort of drive your spend at the awareness level versus the interest level versus purchase and repurchase, and sort of optimize your spend against each of those levels of the traditional funnel, and make some choices based on sort of that understanding. I would love to be able to take, like I said before, some of my first party models and bring those into these environments to optimize our performance. What are we doing to sort of drive awareness, to drive them to a PDP, to drive that purchase and ultimately repurchase? So I believe we're just toeing into so much opportunity. I'm not shocked at all that this has been such a heated discussion this year, because we're all realizing the value and the returns we're getting from these relationships. And again, as these continue to mature, we couldn't be more excited about the opportunity that's sitting there as well.
Excellent. I'm going to go back to a statement that Peter and you briefly discussed right up front in the first question, and that was you refer to the mix. And marketing mix, I've got my own viewpoints on them, how modern they need to be, given all the digital components of today's marketing mix that should be in there. And if it's not there, it's obviously a mix, right? But are marketing mix analytics still all-encompassing and relevant in today's kind of e-commerce, digital, unified commerce environment? And how does actual UX, consumer experience, play directly into this world of, what I would call brand KPIs emerging from the right use of marketing mix?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like the reality is, consumers and our marketing activity, our reach that we drive, right, can't be only solely within sort of the unified commerce environments that you noted. I would love it if the only place consumers engage with brands was inside those environments. That sure would make our lives a lot easier, right? Because you'd be able to sort of work to optimize your spends within an environment where you can see real purchase behavior versus waiting on an attribution model to bring the results back in 6 months or whatever it might be. I think I have a lot of heart for mixed models. I definitely don't want to confuse the issue. When I talk about them, I think they play a really important role in optimizing our paid media spend. But again, because traditional brand marketers may tend to sort of chase those models off a cliff, it can be to our own detriment, because I would argue that sometimes investing in your better ROIs because you've seen great returns there is the thing that you should run away from. Because what you're doing is you're investing spend with consumers who are already likely to buy us. What is that really doing to drive brand penetration and growth if we're just sort of defaulting back to the best ROIs, that we see? So I think they're great, when it comes to optimizing paid, and helping us on our sort of working spend. I do believe that we need to balance that conversation around our non-working spend, because for example, when we see an investment in non-working content for our website to drive SEO, right alongside our paid search investment, there's a multiplier effect, right? I mean, we see these things work better together. So making sure that we bring sort of a balanced perspective into the planning process, and then finding ways to connect the measurement to demonstrate the value that both delivered in tandem. And then to the point about sort of the KPIs, I think when done well, consumer experience can be a huge differentiator for a business. As a diagnostic, it really, it sort of enables benchmarking against ourselves year over year. It enables benchmarking against the competitors. And those diagnostics can start to create really clear direction for us in terms of like, what are steps that we need to take to improve overall consumer experience. And I'm really hopeful, honestly, that the industry starts to pivot more into this space of like, what does CX mean and how do we value that in a way that can stand up to sort of more traditional measures around ROI?
That's terrific, Josh. I'm going to ask the last question of our conversation. We've been very grateful to have you join us because these are all things that we talk a lot about on the podcast and have different opinions from different guests. So it's great to get yours today. Direct-to-consumer is a serious consideration for CPG brands. It's a great way to get 1P data, but the major challenge, certainly for perishable brand manufacturers, is how do they ship it? But even for non-perishable goods, right? Investing against the supply chain capabilities can be pretty daunting for organizations that are really designed to ship pallets to retail warehouses, right? So Kimberly-Clark took a different approach, partnering with Shoppable. We previously had Shoppable CEO Heather Marie Udo on our podcast. I'd love to hear from your perspective. What was the appeal of this methodology, and why is it appropriate for what you consider to be the right D2C strategy?
Yeah, you bet. I mean, we do have other commerce strategies. First of all, I'll say that if we're lucky enough to get a consumer to come to any of our brand sites, I would first rather close the deal on our website versus having them go off to a retailer and shop us against all our competitors and private labels. So I think having that sort of functionality embedded into our existing .com is sort of a fundamental, right? And we have partnerships with companies like Smart Commerce as well, like companies that allow us to deliver on that as a capability, as an opportunity for consumers. Shoppable, what's unique about them was that they, for the first time, gave us the option to not only enable the sale, but to give us full visibility into the purchase at the one-to-one level and collect a first-party opt-in. So I'm sure Heather spoke about that some. There's opportunities not just in owned .com properties, but also in sort of buy now spaces, whether you talk about buy now in Pinterest or just in other sort of buy now media experiences that you build out. But the thing that I think is so sort of interesting about the model they've built is that it becomes a win-win for our retail partners, and it helps you avoid a lot of the channel conflict that seems to always boil up the second you talk about D2C for traditional CPGs. Because not only do we get the data that we're after to help understand and build a richer profile of our consumer base, the retailer ultimately is the one that gets all that transaction level data and they fulfill. So we don't have to build the infrastructure around the delivery, the logistics around any of that. And so I think this space is continuing to evolve. And, I just saw a headline yesterday that I need to dig more into. But, as we think about sort of micro warehousing, like some of the logistics opportunities, I just saw that Walmart, right, is now saying that they're going to allow anybody to use their logistics to ship. Like that starts to become an interesting proposition to understand. Are they working directly with brands to unlock that as a capability as well? So I think there's a lot more to come in this because all CPGs are after the exact same thing. They want richer insight to their consumers because they want to drive the best lifetime value possible at the one-to-one level. That's the game, right? And so this isn't about like not wanting to work with retailers. We absolutely do. They're fundamental to our success. This is about how do we get as much information as we can to give ourselves the best long-term opportunities.
Let me remind our audience that all of our content is available for free. That includes our podcast on 40 platforms. You can link to us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok. All of that are LinkedIn profiles. Just go to cpgguys.com. And again, it's all free. And we are an audience-driven podcast, which means we want you to tell us what we should talk about. Best way to do that, ratethispodcast.com/cpgguys. Go to the Apple platform, leave a review, and give us a rating while you're there. We do seriously listen to that. It's very important. Josh, this was terrific. Thank you for coming to the podcast today and talking to us about these very contemporary issues we're all facing. Your point of view was terrific. We really appreciate it. We're going to put a link to your LinkedIn profile and Kimberly-Clark's website in the digital liner notes of this episode, but we're really great. And thank you for coming today. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me. A lot of fun.
Sri, thank you so much, as always, for joining me. This was another great adventure on our journey. We learned some great stuff from Josh. It was really great to have him on it.
Josh, first of all, thank you for making time to join the CPG guys today. Peter and I really enjoyed the conversation with you, and we learned quite a bit, talked quite a bit about a little bit about D2C, the importance of consumer experience. I loved that we briefly touched marketing mix in the process as well. Overall, I think what we've established again and again on this podcast and again on this particular episode with you, Josh, is the consumer is king or queen, and their experiences matter if we're going to be successful in the CPG industry. Peter, thank you so much. A pleasure doing this week over week with you, and to many more guests coming back and also enjoying this conversation with us on the consumer being the boss.
Yeah, absolutely. And to our audience, thank you again, as always, for joining us, and we look forward to speaking with you on the next episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Goodbye. The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPG Guys LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPG Guys LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPG Guys LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPG Guys LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.